One of my favorites and one of the best things I've ever worked on was an adaptation of your book, The Fuck Up. It's a book I loved. It's a screenplay that I was able to, build from your work. And I think it was probably the best screenplay I've ever worked on. Sadly, some of the lesser ones have been made.
My ex-girlfriend thinks your script is better than my novel, but that's why she's my ex. I get no respect. I get no respect.
Yeah, well, that's the way of it, my friend. Well, let's talk about your new book, The 5 Books of Robert Moses.
Robert Moses.
There's so much to talk about here. Very different from The Fuck Up. I'm going to show everyone it's inside the front cover here because it's a really cool graphic, but it also is a chance to talk about the book. There we see Rescue City.
That, by the way, was done by a certain Sohrab Habibian, who is an incredibly talented graphic designer and artist, and that's his genius. And he also did the back cover as well, by the way.
What is Rescue City? Tell everyone.
Rescue City is essentially my view of America today. It is a place of utter chaos, absurdity, humor, violence, hypocrisy, sex. It's this kind of strange world that really is set in the past that I was really trying to make a statement about our situation today, at least the last 20 years, more or less. Starting with an event somewhat like 9/11 to a war that was a little like, maybe Iraq, to and parallels kind of abound from there. They go on. So ostensibly, it was a place where the federal government set up while New York City was being cleaned up after a dirty bomb attack. But again, to me, it's really...
And it's in Nevada, right?
It's in the desert of Nevada. It's geographically isolated.
And here's in the back flap, just to show the complement to Rescue City, is what's called Old Town.
There it is.
There.
Yeah. Well, that's what they all call. That's their colloquial term for New York City.
And
Old
there's
Town.
New York City. That's actually Manhattan and all the boroughs. And
it details a lot of Robert Moses's major accomplishments on the back because he's kind of a big figure in this thing.
This is touching on Manhattan, the modern world, the situation in America now, and the kind of the chaos and argumentative nature and the kind of deconstructionist kind of anarchist almost energy coming from every sector. Maybe even more from the conservative and Republican sector than any other place comes this anarchist urge to just tear everything apart. It's very strange, right?
It makes no sense at all.
It touches on that. That informs this story. It's sci-fi. It's a futuristic. It's funny. But it also incorporates all these characters from New York in the 70s. It's a little hard to get across, but it's almost like you have such strong feelings for these characters and for the vibe of New York at that time.
Exactly.
You want to talk about that for a second? Some of the characters that we meet who actually lived and who you're inventing again in this futuristic scenario?
Sure. I mean, there's a cast of characters list in the front of the book and it states all these actual historical characters, and a lot of them were relatively minor, mainly artists, actors, poets, painters, and so on. And it was interesting because where I think our primary source for culture nowadays is the internet. Back then, especially in New York City, you had this really lively local culture that was that you could meet and hang out with, and it was inspiring. And I mean, back in the 80s when I was growing up in the city, which was actually a little after that, you'd see these writers and novelists and painters and composers on the street.
Name some of the people you saw when you were hanging out in New York at that time.
Sure. Well, I mean, at least back in the 80s in the East Village, I mean, you'd always see Ginsberg, but I also met all the beats. I met Corso and Burroughs and stuff like that. I mean, Phil Glass is still around. He was like a block away. I see him pretty regularly. various novelists. I mean, I remember seeing everyone from Norman Mailer to Walter Abish, who's still alive. I mean, a lot of them, that are still kind of. I'm not that old, unfortunately, so I can't really go that far back. But the point is, that you saw these guys, and they were inspiring if you were a young writer. They weren't just a name, and you'd see that they were kind of, they were dressed kind of loosely, and and they weren't gods, and they weren't immortal, and you could kind of feel like you could become something like this. It was accessible, and you would meet other younger writers in bookstores and places where you'd go physically, and you could kind of develop friendships. And there was a do-it-yourself spirit back then. I mean, being able to put on a play in an off Broadway space when it was like, I don't know, $1 a square foot for rent, and put together a magazine, mimeograph or Xerox or saddle stitch poems. It was very much do it yourself, and from that we had this wonderful culture that I just think is missing today to a large degree.
And you tried to carry that vibe and those characters over into this world. And tell everyone who might be watching who Robert Moses is, but also the parallel between this story, this saga, and the actual books of Moses from the Bible. So first, tell everybody who Robert Moses was.
For New York City, he was the first 5-borough park commissioner, but he was the Secretary of State under Al Smith. And the one thing he asked for when Smith was leaving office, I think in the 20s, was he wanted to run the Highway Commission, among other commissions. And this one little appointment, which was a non-elected post, through that, Moses was able to just accumulate power and position and authority and do all these incredible sweeping changes to New York without ever having to get elected, to some degree by bullying, extorting, blackmailing, and basically, it's an interesting question. Was Robert Moses a good figure or a bad figure? Some people think he was amazing because he got a lot done. And he was amazing, and he did get a lot done, and that is commendable. On the other hand, I feel like if Robert Moses died around 1940, he would be looked at as kind of a heroic figure. He made personal sacrifices and was able to get these great deals for the city. And then shortly after that, as his power kept accumulating, I think he was head of the basically developing early housing projects. It got more dictatorial.
Well, he was going to do some things that really would have destroyed New York.
Yes.
If he hadn't been fought tooth and nail by some very determined people. And that's the Jane Jacobs story, and I'm sure there's other stories tied into that too. But Robert Moses is important, but also talk about how this is structured and connects to the books of Moses from the Bible.
Well, I mean, the book of Moses from the Bible, which are 5 books, and they deal with a people that are kind of under captivity. And I guess, to me, I mean, New York, or at least the tradition of New York, what New York once was, is now kind of, it's now kind of under siege. It's kind of beleaguered. It seems like it's kind of being obliterated. And that was what I literally did, is I took New York City, I took a lot of those people, and I put them into this kind of quote unquote rescue scenario where the government comes to rescue them, but it actually turns into more of a detainment center. And they end up having to kind of do the 40-year trek across the desert to get their own freedom. By the end, I don't want to go too far, but so there are parallels. And of course, Moses becomes kind of a strange dark Moses figure in the book. But that's probably all I should say about that.
Oh my God. When you started writing this book 25 years ago, what was your original intention?
It was actually more like I began it on February of 93 is when I began it. And I just really wanted, there were several basic ideas. I wanted something that shows the relationship of people to their government. I wanted to I was trying to highlight another element of New York because it was going through this strange, morphing from a city that had just experienced white flight to one that was kind of going through gentrification. And I kind of followed history from 9/11 on, and the novel just kind of took on a life of its own.
Why are some of the words blacked out?
Oh, that's the redactions that it's actually mimicking the memory problems of that Yuli, our central character, is experiencing, and there's a redaction element throughout it. So, by the way, those illustrations, I just like to mention that's Lisa Archigian. She did 103 illustrations that really captured the essence of the book. And if you find a copy, just flip through it and take a look. You can almost tell the whole novel by just looking at these illustrations. That's Times Square from how we remember it, when it was clean and we didn't have junkies and we didn't have painted women of the marketplace.
What are some of the differences between writing a 1,500-page novel versus a 300-page novel?
Let's see, other than 1,200 pages, I guess about 23 years of your life.
Obviously, this was written long before Trump and long before coronavirus.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, there's a feeling. I mean, and long before ICE and the detention centers that have been used in the last few years and upgraded and sort of overloaded. And boy, there's just it's strange that the chaotic world that is described in this book is a little real life is close in a lot of ways.
Well, I just read on a news item today that in the tunnels and the borders between, I think, New York and Jersey, they're going to start setting up, they're going to check temperatures of people coming in. And I actually have that in my novel. In the bridges, I have different boroughs. They line you up and take your temperature because there's a pandemic at the end. I had no clue it was going to happen, and I don't think I would have wrote it if I knew it was going to happen. But same thing, masks and social distancing, and the parks become quarantine centers.
Where did you live when you were in Manhattan?
Well, I guess through the 60s. I was born in Manhattan in 58. We lived in a rent-controlled apartment on the southwest corner of 50th Street and 3rd Avenue. We paid, I think, $55 a month for the whole floor. And it was kind of a rundown place, even though it sounded pretty nice. It was across the street from the Waldorf Astoria.
Now, after coronavirus, do you think some of that will return? Some of that? Because, I mean, I don't think big cities are going to be nearly as attractive as they were.
It's interesting to see. I mean, there are certain things that are emerging now and that are really reminding me of the old days. I mean, it is emptier. The other day I went through the McCarran Park in Williamsburg, and there was a huge group meeting, and it was like a poetry reading, and it was actually a Black Lives Matter group. And the thing is, I couldn't help but remember how all this kind of underground culture and counterculture came out of the anti-war movement back in the late 60s, early 70s, which led to this really nice youth culture. And I thought, gee, maybe that's happening here, and they're organizing around this, which is nice, other than the cause itself, the idea that it's bringing young people together. And, I think that's a positive thing. But the city is getting emptier, but I haven't seen the rents coming down yet. So that's still something to look forward to.
Yeah.
So,
we'll see. We'll see. Well, congratulations on writing this book and coming to some sense of conclusion with it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
It's great. Arthur's one of my favorite writers.
Thank you so much. And you're one of my favorite, and I'm not just saying that. I call Saul every day, just about every day.
Well, hopefully we'll get to make more of our show too. I know we will. We just have to wait until things are safer, because our cast is, for so many reasons. One being, we have an older cast. I'm 58. I'm 57. I'll be 58. So,
wow. Okay.
Just we need to have a certain interaction with the world around us, that this virus and the precautions that need to be taken makes very, very difficult.
Yeah.
So we actually are talking about making more and how to deal with that, so that we get to keep the same vibe, the same kind of interactions with the people in the world of the show.
You can't do one of those Zoom Sauls like
We
Saturday
can't
Night
do a
Live.
Zoom version of it. No, I'm on a show on Amazon called Undone. It is an animated show, but you act it out. You act it out, and then you're rotoscoped, and the backgrounds are painted. Now we can do that show, but
great.
even in that show, there's never more than 2 actors at one time, and most of the time I'm alone, or any actor is alone. And if I'm talking to another character, it's literally a styrofoam wig head mounted on a stick.